Hi viewers, sorry about the break there. Had a technical issue. We're talking about algocracy and we were discussing humans as being part of the law and political system and being able to contribute there, and the threat of algocracy to completely redefine what it means to be an agent in that system and perhaps remove the need for humans to be in that system. But we were also talking about if we do enter a system where we give up our rights or our abilities to interact and contribute to these systems, then we may never be able to get that back. John?
Yes, so that's an important point, and it kind of goes back to one of the original inspirations for this line of research from me. It was an article by a guy called Evgeny Morozov, who I'm sure people have heard of, and he's usually very critical of technology. And he wrote this article a few years ago in the MIT Technology Review called The Real Privacy Problem, which is largely about the threat of algocracy as I've described it, although he didn't use that terminology. And he talks about how over-reliance on these systems and eventual deference to automated systems we could end up becoming trapped in invisible barbed wire, in the sense that the machines, this is his language, sorry. So the machine's going to tell us everything that we should do and what's good for us. They ping us, they recommend activities to us, they nudge our behavior in various ways. And it all seems to be wonderful. You know, we have longer lives, we're healthier, we're happier. But we don't know how to kind of regain control or challenge these systems. So we're completely reliant upon them. And like in many ways that's happening already and continues to happen, in that I think the term that's used in the literature is like automation bias, that we start to just rely on the automated system over time and we don't regain the capability that we've outsourced to the machine. The leading example of that at the moment, I guess, is just like memory of phone numbers is a simple one, or
Maps, Google Maps.
Maps would be the other example. That we don't actually remember maps in our heads anymore, how to get somewhere. We just rely on the sat nav or it's not the Google Maps system. No one remembers phone numbers anymore because we don't have to. But you know, losing some of that control in many areas can be a good thing, because it frees us up to do other things that are more valuable and more worthy of our time. The question is whether handing over control, at least when it comes to governance and political kind of decision making, whether that's as good a thing. And that kind of gets back to the point we were talking about earlier on, about whether this is one particular domain that is kind of more sacred, or in some secularized sense of sacred.
I was just thinking an ultimate form of hellish utopia could be us looking at our mechanism for determining what could be fun and what could be creative and what could be, awesome to do. Like if you're an agent in some virtual reality, or you're an agent, so like a utopia where you're just trying to enjoy and flourish the most, you may actually optimize. You may want to optimize your flourishing, and therefore, instead of actually choosing or self-determining what you want to flourish in, like whether it be guitar or something else, you offload that onto another decision-making procedure for yourself.
to select the ideal
Fun thing to do. Yeah. So it's got it's got
some a random fun generator.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds attractive in many ways. I mean, one major problem that we all have nowadays, I presume you're the same, is deciding like what to watch or what to read or what to do. There are many times when I think I would like to outsource some of that decision making.
And which science fiction books to read next, or which essays, or
Yeah, and in essence, that's what a lot of the current algorithmic systems are trying to do. Yeah. They're trying to tailor things to our preferences, or what they perceive to be our preferences, because we're overloaded with information and data.
Right.
Again, that's back to the drive towards introducing these systems, is that there's so much out there that no human can actually comprehend and deal with, that we need this decision support system.
Like it's like an advanced form of coherent, aggregated, or extrapolated volition, that
Yeah,
takes society's preferences and puts them in a society that they'd most like or they'd most flourish in if they were smarter, stronger, wiser, and more powerful. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Mm.
Yeah, there was yeah. So
Crazy stuff. Now, there were a couple of questions. One of them was from David Zuccaro, and I'm trying to find that. Here it is. I think it's pretty similar to some of the things we were talking about before, but what does he say? Would individual rights exist under algocracy? Well, yes, we sort of answered that question. If so, how would individual rights be traded off to achieve utilitarian outcomes?
well, I mean, that's not necessarily a problem with algorithmic governance systems. That's more a problem with like a trade-off between different kinds of political philosophy. So you could certainly still protect individual rights in an algocracy, and that could be part of what's programmed into the algorithmic governance systems, that you want a set of decisions that optimize the protection of, I don't know, the right to property or the right to bodily integrity or whatever. So you could create a system that optimizes for those rights. It doesn't necessarily have to be a purely kind of utilitarian decision maker. The kind of rights that might be lost within, my um, argument there is that maybe you lose some rights to participation because they no longer become practical
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's done. The decisions themselves could still optimize for certain kinds of protections of rights.
Hmm. Sure.
Yeah.
And okay, so this is a comment, actually more than a question. But Tory Wright. Oh, actually, it is a question. So, as for instance, there is emergence of AI being used for legal assistance, and actually, yeah, there's been sort of news reports. I haven't actually read them about the first AI lawyer. I'm not sure it's actually an AI lawyer. I think it's more like a legal decision support system. Is it? Have you?
Yeah, I actually haven't read that particular example, but there's a good book by Richard and Daniel Suskind called The Future of the Professions, which is all about the rise of automation and AI in various professions, and law is one of the main examples that they use. And yeah, there have been decision support tools used in law for a long time, and there have been various people who have developed, like, game theoretical models of trial processes that are run on computers that try to predict outcomes.
Interesting.
And there's been a long-standing tradition of jury consultants who consult on jury attributes, and they can also rely now more on kind of data aggregates from people and profiles of people from social media and things like that to
Right.
reach conclusions of who would be good.
Right.
And there's also
So they get to sort of select a jury based on the outcomes of simulations,
yeah, exactly,
based on the sort of outcomes
predictions.
they
Yeah,
want. Yeah. Okay. That's.
yeah. One of the big things actually, which is being outsourced in law, are kind of routine tasks. Because law is actually full of routine tasks, but one of them would be certain kinds of court documents that are prepared. You can outsource a lot of that. I mean, so that's already being outsourced to humans, but that could be outsourced to computers. And then also discovery of documents. Like one of the things in big trials in particular is that you've got piles of emails to or documents to read through to try and find for useful information that could be used at trial. And one of the kind of hazing rituals for new lawyers at large commercial practices or firms is that they spend hours going through just boxes of files, reading these documents, trying to find and highlight useful information. Well, nowadays, again, a lot of that can just be automated.
Yes.
So
Well, Tony's point was there is an emergence of AI in legal for legal assistance. I'm concerned AIs could be employed to target DMCA infringements and patent infringements as well. Though I do think these infractions break the current system, I wouldn't suggest that they have sustained or value. What I am generally concerned about is AI being used to prevent market innovation as opposed to accelerating it. By it being employed to sustaining mature models. So yeah, stopping other innovators because you want to have your system, or because one company wants their system to remain supreme, or
yeah,
retain market dominance. Yeah,
monopoly power or whatever. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, obviously the patent system is deeply problematic in many ways at the moment, and the ways in which patent trolls find people to litigate against or sue for infringements of patents. There's been some very well publicized incidents of this in the past few years. And of course, like if lawyers are relying on some kind of machine learning system to trawl through the database of patents that are online and to find potential infringements somewhere, they might be able to do that much more efficiently and effectively. So you might have more of these kinds of what could be perceived as nuisance or innovation denying lawsuits that arise. That's definitely a problem. However, one thing I would say is that problem is a function of the set of rules that we currently have in existence in relation to patents and various other areas. And in principle, we could change that setup of rules. This is the problem with lawyers in general: is that lawyers will try to exploit loopholes, or not loopholes, but they will try to exploit legal rules to the benefit of their clients, whoever those clients happen to be. And there are ways in which that can be a nuisance for people. Like there was a huge debate in the early 90s about tort law in America and tort law reform, because you've got these mass class action lawsuits against pharmaceutical companies, let's say, or various other institutions who might be thought of as having some value for society because they're producing new medications or whatever. But they can't do it because they're constrained by all these lawsuits, and maybe there needed to be tort law reform to get rid of some of these kind of nuisance lawsuits. But there are arguments from the other side as well that you need to discipline these large organizations too. I mean, that's a point actually that James Hughes makes a lot in his comments about futurism and transhumanism. Is that a lot of transhumanists tend to be kind of libertarian or techno-utopian and don't like the idea of regulators and government interference. And one of the questions he often poses as well, in the future, would you have a Food and Drug Administration at all? Is there a value to having some kind of regulator to approve things? Like there is a popular view that it creates barriers or obstacles to innovation, but there's also the view that it does perform some kind of valuable function in ensuring safety and high standards for things. So yeah, I mean, that's a long answer to the question, but
yeah, that is a great answer. And while you're answering there, I thought of an extension. It may have been implied in the original sort of point that Tori was making, is that what if AI were not only sort of employed to sort of find existing patents and try and find ways that they could be infringing current patents owned by a certain company. Let's just say like a pharmaceutical company came out with a drug to, let's say, cure cancer, or cure cancer, all cancer, and thought that there are other ways of doing it. What it could do is use advanced AI to mine other possible routes and automate, the beginnings of certain patents, such that anybody else who could come along and try and create not similar patents to the product that was actually being sold on the market, but infringed all these other patents, which are other doorways to cure cancer. They were sort of manned by these sort of AI agents continuously, well, not manned, but continuously found by AI agents, and then there were sort of small but never used patents set up to protect or guard against these other doorways to potential cure cancer. And so one company had a monopoly on all cures to cancer in a sense.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I mean, I had a similar thought actually, even as I was answering the question as well. But yeah, you could have a machine that's effectively, an algorithm that's generating millions of new patent designs, and some of them are broadly correct, and somebody approves those, and then you lock down the market for the future. That's an interesting possibility, but again, there are ways in which we could presumably design the patent approval process to minimize that if we deem that to be a problem, that we could minimize that problem.
Right. So one of the things about the the libertarian argument is that like you can do anything so long as it doesn't harm others, right?
Hmm.
But there's a problem in how do you define what constitutes as harm?
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah,
there's a
a big
large
topic, right?
literature on
Yeah.
that. I get, yeah, I mean, you can obviously have very narrow definitions of harm in terms of physical harm to biological functioning in some way. The common definition in legal debates, let's say, because the harm principle, Mill's harm principle features a lot in legal debates, is typically a harm is like a setback to your life interests in some way.
Mm.
But the thing is that we have lots of life interests, and there are lots of things that can set back or influence our life interests. So it's a very broad concept, and
Mm.
oftentimes you need to be narrower in your approach to defining it.
Oh, and
But
also one of the other things is look, we seem to be heading pretty fast into a pretty big future, and in terms of like the ability of what the sort of tools or tasks that AIs can actually perform. And we may end up like we hinted about superintelligence before. But what would be, do you think, the main important differences between an algocracy using mundane expert systems that don't have any sort of agency in and of themselves, and an algocracy that maybe, or it like a one in between that used modern AI techniques like Bayesian, that's deep learning and that. But on the other side, an algocracy administered by super intelligent AIs. Is there any main differences that you think would need to be highlighted between certain implementations?
yeah, I mean, there's 2 points here. One is that I think there is a continuum of sorry, I should say that the concept of algocracy, applying that label to a system, can be misleading in the sense that it can describe very different systems. And we uncovered some of that already in our conversation when you mentioned proto-algocracies and the fact that algorithmic expert-based decision-making systems are common in
Yes.
human governance.
Yeah, right. To a degree, we have that now. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I have thought about this a bit, and I do have a paper on one of my websites. It's on my blog, and it's on the website I have for a project I'm running, which is
Okay.
called the Algocracy and Transhumanism Project. It's
Yeah.
called the logical space of algocracy, which is about the fact that there are many different kinds of algocratic system,
Ah,
and
okay.
it depends on what's being automated. So, like broadly speaking, if you think about it, intelligent systems are ones that acquire information from their surroundings. They process that information in some way.
Mm.
They make decisions on the basis of that processing, and then they learn from what they did,
Yep.
and because it's kind of a loop back, right? And now, so you've got four processes there. Now, humans and machines can share those different processes. So, humans can provide all the inputs to the machine which does the processing and makes the decisions, or the machines can collect all the information and pass it on to human decision makers to do the processing and decision making. Or there's various combinations of this. So you can range from a fully human system at one end of the spectrum, where humans do all four functions,
Mm-hmm.
to a fully automated system at the other end, where a machine does all four functions. So the way in which I would envisage it is that at present we're somewhere in the middle of this kind of spectrum, of this logical space, where we have lots of shared tasks, some completely automated, some completely performed by humans.
Mm.
We could end up in a system where it's completely automated.
Mm.
What would that completely automated system look like? There's a distinction to be drawn between one that is maybe just a kind of a generally competent automated system, AI effectively, or it consists of many discrete types of AI that govern particular domains of decision making,
Mm-hmm.
or one in which it's a super intelligent AI, a kind of oracle AI, which is controlling everything. And those are very different types of completely automated system, I think. And the super intelligent one would obviously raise a separate set of issues which are well thrashed out in the futurist literature, but whether it would pose a particular existential risk because of the decisions that it would make. But I think you could have fully automated systems that are not nowhere near that kind of super intelligent level, which have their own kind of interesting questions, mainly around what we've been talking about today in terms of transparency and opacity and efficiency, which don't raise the same kinds of existential concerns as super intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And we did another interview actually on superintelligence. So.
Yes, that's right. Yes, we certainly did. So, look, what about hackability? We'll talk about actually the IT security aspects of this. So, let's imagine like we have a system and we depend on it quite a lot, and it ends up being hacked either by an external party or an internal party. What could be some motivations? I mean, to hack the system, and surely, a crime boss might want to hack this database so that they don't have official records of all the crimes that he's done or whatnot, or somebody trying to influence the passing of certain regulatory laws that favour his position in the market. As being manipulable from the top down. People who are the lawmakers or the actual people in government may in power at the time may wish to bias the algorithms in such a way that it favours their continuous reign. But yeah, because it's a system, a computational system, it's hackable in ways that systems involving a lot of humans aren't. You can buy people with motivations, but you can't get in and actually hack and change, routines as much.
Yeah, so absolutely. I'm quite influenced by the work of a guy called Mark Goodman on some of this. He wrote that book called Future Crimes, which you may be familiar with.
Future Crimes?
Okay. Yeah, Future Crimes.
Oh, okay,
he's a former FBI analyst. He's been on other kind of futurist shows. So what's the one? Singularity One-on-One. They have an interview with him, and he's been on a few other things as well.
Okay, yeah, I'll definitely check him out.
Any system you have that has a lot of control or power will be attractive to somebody to hack because they will want to have that control or power. For whatever reason. So if you have, let's say, an algorithm that is in charge of auditing tax returns, okay, and verifying who is or isn't likely tax cheat or whatever, then a wealthy person who's trying to avoid tax or evade tax, whatever it happens to be, would have an incentive to try and manipulate that system. So there's an attraction to trying to hack and control that system. And the same goes for any example you care to come up with, where the system has power. There's probably somebody out there who would like to have that power for themselves. Now, what Goodman points out, and one of his arguments, which he doesn't flesh out in a lot of detail, but I fleshed out in a bit more detail in a post that I wrote called "Are We Heading Towards a Singularity of Crime?", which is the idea that the more connectivity we have, the more connected devices are, and the more on which we rely upon algorithmic or automated decision-making systems, the more vulnerable we are to crime or to hackability, basically.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of ways of expressing this concern. One is which is just that the scale of the possible scale of criminality is increasing dramatically in terms of what one person can do, and the number of people that they will affect through that decision to hack a system is growing on kind of almost at an exponential rate. So that's where you get this idea that it's equivalent to some extent to a singularity, because you're getting an exponential growth in the scale of criminality.
And it's hard to know what it looks like on the other side after the tipping point in this scale of criminality goes up. It just maybe it's, I imagine it will look like chaos.
Yeah, and the other point Goodman makes, is that it's also the lifetime risk of being a victim of crime just basically goes to one. Like everyone's a victim of going to be a victim of crime at some point in time. Like he has a quote, something like that: "Once everything's connected, everything's vulnerable, everything's hackable." And the big problem with this, which is a one that's well known to designers of systems to can prevent hackability or attack, is the asymmetry problem, which is that, this is a quote from his book, the person who's designing the system, the defender, must build a perfect wall to keep out all intruders, to prevent hackability, while the intruder or the offense, they only need to find one chink in the armor through which to attack. So it's definitely a big, like hackability will be a big problem the more we rely upon these kinds of systems. There was a recent story about the nuclear industry in America and how they are only now getting rid of floppy disks. I don't know if you
No, I didn't
saw
know that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I did, I think last year I attended an event run by the World Institute for Nuclear Security. I was invited to give a talk at it for some bizarre reason. I don't know why they invited me there. But it was interesting to listen to a lot of them talking how they are very, very worried about the use of connected control systems in nuclear power plants and things. And they wouldn't allow it, obviously. They try to lock them down and prevent that from happening. And they like the idea of having older systems which are less vulnerable. But the problem is they're less upgradable, and there are problems with their reliability and functionality over time, but they're less hackable in that sense.
Right. Yes. Is it because they're just less connected, or the fact that they're less common these days? People don't know how to hack them.
Less connected seemed to be the argument that they were making.
Okay.
But they are more vulnerable to other kinds of attack, which they pointed out.
Right. Yeah.
Not like distance-based attacks, but they're more vulnerable to other kinds of flaws or weaknesses.
Mm. So you're aware, of course, of the whole surveillance, covalence sort of issues. Brin and Werner Vinci and Jameis Cassio
Steve
and a
Mann,
number of others. Steve Mann, yeah. That's it's quite interesting. I've interviewed like Yamei Cassio, like back in 2012, yeah, about this when I was in San Francisco. Yeah, I find that quite interesting as well. Like the idea that, there seems to be, at the moment at least, some form of asymmetry between how visible we are as citizens, and how invisible the system is above us, or the people who are watching down us. But I think their concern is more about not necessarily the algorithms, but more on the advantages that certain people get from such a system.
Mm-hmm.
And thoughts about privacy and everything. Is there any thoughts about that relate to the idea of participatory panopticon, as you may put it?
Yeah, I do have a lot of thoughts. And again, I would point people to, I wrote a two-part series of blog posts called "What's the Case for Surveillance," which analyzes in a lot of depth Steve Mann's arguments in particular for surveillance. So, let me say, like broadly, I'm in favor of the idea of increased transparency and any attempt to equalize asymmetries of power within society. And I guess the problem with surveillance systems is that they are controlled and operated from above, from the government or from large kind of monopolistic private corporations in effect. And anything that can suffice to equalize the power between the ordinary citizens and those institutions is, in my opinion, a good thing, generally speaking. Anyway, however, I'm a little bit more skeptical about the kind of radical possibilities of surveillance, at least as it's understood by people like Steve Mann and David Brin. Yeah. No, David Brin, and they're both thoughtful people and flesh out these ideas in a lot of depth, and they thought about them. But I'm skeptical of the idea that just having various kinds of personal valence equipment like cameras and recording devices will manage to equalize the power. So, like some of the examples that man uses in terms of a lot of them are economic type arguments, or
well, they require a big system to process this, all these audio data streams or video data streams or data collection streams that little brothers and sisters are running around with and make sense of it, in a sense.
yeah.
So, I mean, if Facebook's, can spy on us, what can we do? I mean, we can't just go to the Facebook offices with a few cameras and, point it in their direction and make sense of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so you've expressed in a succinct manner, effectively. That's my view. I mean, one of the examples that man uses in terms of like your interaction with some bureaucratic organization, that going there with the recording equipment and recording the interaction would be good for you because you've full documentary proof of the interaction and all that. Like, and so there probably could be some value to that. But again, as you point out, that doesn't make the systems necessarily more transparent to us. It just means that we are better able to account for ourselves and what we've done and our interactions, and whether that information is valuable in terms of rebalancing the asymmetry of power is a separate question. The surveillance by itself, the surveillance equipment by itself, isn't going to suffice. Now, there are contexts in which it probably could be a good thing.
Yeah.
So, like, the interactions with police officers or the police body cams, that whole debate. I think there are arguments for saying that, yeah, in that context, because that's usually a physical interaction with another person, or it's a human type interaction anyway, there could be value to having the documentary proof, and that could correct for asymmetries of power there. But in terms of the surveillance and kind of algorithmic control of humans, I'm less convinced that it will rebalance things there. The other big problem with it as well is that where's the technology for all this surveillance equipment coming from? Where are you going to get your personal body cam and personal data processing equipment?
Yeah, the data processing equipment and the an agreed on sort of algorithm to sort of churn through it all, make sense of it is difficult. But I'd say that everybody's got phones and they have the ability to record. It's just that they're
No, everybody has them. I don't deny that. Yeah. But who actually controls those systems and operates those systems?
Yeah, ultimately? That's right. Yeah.
It's not you, really. You have some control over its operation.
It could be a case that in the future everybody has these sort of devices that life cast in a sense. And if it's an open system and they're happy for it to be like that, people aren't that concerned about the privacy of their life being exposed. Then if it's all sort of centralized and processed, then meta tags could be spread throughout video. You could have multiple sort of views on any one particular given such situation. So you have like somebody arguing that he didn't steal the bread, or that person didn't run a red light, or that person didn't punch the other guy in the face. And then you could say, well, here are three other people's viewpoints on this situation to say that, well, yes, you did. What you got to say about that? Or the politician, telling a lie who says, oh, I was taken out of context, but the context could be then well defined from many points of view, in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you'd hope that is true, but there are still interpretation issues in how interactions are interpreted that are never going to go away. But yeah, having the documentary proof of an interaction is certainly valuable in avoiding, let's say, the problems of just purely conflicting testimony from people. It's like, well, this happened, and the other person says this happened. Well, now we know exactly what happened. We have a recording of what happened, but it's still going to be up to everybody else to interpret the significance of that. And I suspect there will continue to be disagreements about it.
Right. So if that sort of scenario were to come to fruition, then like it'd be very hard to tell black lies, but white lies and forms of deceit that could, you could spray culpable deniability over everything just by being crafty.
There are some examples of this that I see already. There is transparency of a lot of court documents in the US in particular. So, let's say sexual harassment suits. This is an example I've looked into recently about whether certain emails were sexually harassing or not. And you can have full documentary proof of all the emails. So they're all there and you can read through all of them. And yet people will disagree about whether there was truly sexual harassment here. Because people interpret what was said in different ways. And that problem, I suspect, will never go away. But at least you'll know what was said.
So it would be kind of like a real strange world where the way that we communicate is certainly influenced quite heavily by motivations to be not quite transparent in language and not quite clear. So I'd imagine that there'd be some selection pressure in both directions to be suspicious,
be more ambiguous,
be more ambiguous, but also the trust mechanisms may shift to straight, clear communication, and
Yeah, that's interesting because I can see it going both ways, and that is one of the arguments that Steve Mann makes, is that it will improve trust. Surveillance will improve trust because now, or will it be a proxy for trust? That's another interesting question. So you don't need to trust people anymore because you have full recordings of what they're doing and what they're up to. That could be one issue. But then would there actually be an incentive for people to have more kind of plausible deniability built into what they say and how they interact with others, which makes it maybe more difficult to trust them? That's an interesting question, which I haven't thought about in that particular way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for people's mechanisms of trust to, like for instance, I mean, the more opaque a system of communication would be, the less trust you'd put in that communication to produce results that you want, or to produce an outcome, or be as trustworthy. Whereas one that is clearly understood, one that is completely transparent in the form of its communication, could be considered far more trustworthy and usable then as a result, which has some interesting outcomes as well.
There'd be a selection pressure towards that or something. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. But we don't necessarily see that in some of the political conversations, I don't think. I think that, a lot of what I, see popping across my feeds is politicians speaking very vaguely,
and actually the
not being clear about
mass media coverage and the fact that they know that everything they say is discoverable by a journalist in the future, it could be brought back to get them, or could be repeated back to them, much to their dismay in a future date, actually, encourages them to hedge their bets more often in what they say. There's a journalist in the US, Tim Russert, did this thing called Meet the Press for years. He was famous for the kind of gotcha interview where he would troll through everything that the politician had said previously and repeat the quotes back to them and say, well, you're saying this back then, but now you're saying this. There's a contradiction here. I wonder, with mass media coverage, whether there's a pressure for politicians to avoid that by being just more and more, hedging or guarded in what they say at all times, because they know everything they say could come back around to them again.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I was talking with Zoltan Istvan a while ago, and I was trying to get him to. He said he was running for president. I was trying to extract some policies from him. What are you standing for? And he said transhumanism, promoting transhumanism. But how? And he wouldn't tell me. And look, I was quite. I admit openly, it's very. I think for those who know me, I think it's very clear that I was very suspicious of him because of his book that he wrote. The transhumanist wager there. I think that within the transhumanist scene, a representative of transhumanism going around saying certain things and Yeah, it's kind of gotten me a bit worried. Yeah, I was a bit worried when he started talking about putting chip implants based on in people based on their race and you know their well, you know what part of the world they were migrating from. Mm.
Yeah, I had a brief discussion with James Hughes about this in the interview I had with him, and I expressed the fact that I couldn't make it the whole way through the transhumanist wager, unfortunately. Um,
It seemed
but I,
incredibly self-congratulatory in a sense, you know, these victory speeches everywhere.
yeah, and as I said, it reminded me very much of Atlas Shrugged, which
Yeah.
I also attempted to read many years ago, and I found it's a 1,200 page book, but I think after about 150 pages, I knew the philosophy and the message, and it was just repeating itself over and over again, and
Hmm.
I had enough of it. But I would be very disturbed by the politics in the transhumanist wager, but I understand that Zoltan kind of distances himself from some of that. But
Mm.
some of what he writes in his opinion pieces as well is really, to me,
Yeah.
disturbing.
Yeah, to my set as aesthetics, it certainly is disturbing. But there's one other point that I wanted to bring up, and that is how theories of mind affect legal systems. And briefly brought up with James Hughes about distributed cognition. Yeah, and there's various forms of that. There could be situated cognition. There's a traditional distributed idea of cognition, and the idea that yeah, I actually went to the university in Sydney and did some interviews with some people about how they actually interacted with each other, and a lot of the time, especially with older people, they use their husbands or their wives to help them remember, in a sense
Mm,
that what's going on in their cognition is not just limited to their skull. They're not just skull-bound intelligences. It's not like this um, agent and situation duality going on. They're very integrated. And it brings up agency as well. I just wondered if you'd developed some thoughts since your discussion with James Hughes in that direction.
yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, there's this whole concept in philosophy of mind about the extended mind,
Yes, yeah, but that
which
was
is
what
developed by
Chalmers and
Chalmers and Clark, yeah,
yeah, Andy
back in the
Clark.
90s.
But he's
Which is
developed the ideas since, yeah, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and he's gone back a little bit from some of the more extreme claims he made in his earlier work about, but still broadly endorsing the idea of this kind of distributed cognition model, and that, yeah, what happens in our minds or what we are or what our thought is not purely skull bound. It doesn't end at the barrier of the skull. It's distributed across various kind of motivational and cognitive scaffolding in the environment around you, which I think is actually a very important point. And I envisage it in a few different ways, that there's motivational scaffolding in your environment. Other people, devices that issue recommendations to you, remind you of certain things, alarm clocks, all that kind of thing that motivate you to do things. There's cognitive scaffolding, calculators, computers, books, all these things that we rely on for our cognitive labor and thought. And also then, uh, which may be an intermediate category, there's some kind of moral scaffolding that takes place as well, in terms of moral guidance, moral influences on our behaviors. It's not purely just how we think and understand the world, but how we think we ought to interact with the world. And one of the problems with endorsing an overly kind of liberal understanding of governance and of politics is that you tend to isolate and prioritize the individual over the individual in a traditional sense of like the physical being almost, over the cognitive, motivational, and moral scaffolding that the individual navigates on and relies upon on a daily basis. And I think it's very important when we think about designing ideal systems or maybe utopian systems for human beings that we think about both elements of it. because we are so dynamically interactive with our environments and what's happening around us. I mean, that's a very vague idea, but yeah. And I do think there are better and worse ways in which to design those external scaffolds. And some of this has come up in work by Evan Selinger, who is probably a little bit more critical than I would tend to be of certain kinds of automated systems, because he thinks it's not so much that he's worried about outsourcing things in general, he's just worried about the kind of design decisions that go into current forms of outsourcing, that they tend to deprioritize certain kinds of human virtues, for example. And I think that's important. And I'm actually going to be talking to him for my podcast next week.
Okay, so you've got another podcast coming on. Okay, that's cool. You're going to be talking to him on these particular. Who I think it'd be good. Actually, you should consider interviewing David Brin if you.
Yeah, if I can get him on, I will do that. I'm interviewing a few people in the next couple of weeks. I'm doing 4 or 5 in the next few weeks. I wasn't able to do any during May. That was the problem.
Oh, that's cool. So you're putting all your interviews up in archive.org. That's what I do, or at least the audio versions of them, anyway.
Yeah, that's where I put it. Yeah.
Cool.
Free, open source stuff.
Yeah. If there's if you've got any points, I haven't got any other questions that I've seen from any of the people who were going to watch it live, because I couldn't do it live because of the problems with Google Hangouts not being available in this part of the world. But yeah, I can't see if there's any other questions, and that's it for me. Have you got any points that you'd like to bring up that I hadn't?
No, I don't really. I mean, this conversation took a number of twists and turns, and going back to points that I may have wanted to raise earlier on are pointless at this stage, I think. But yeah, I recommend people read the paper, which kind of encapsulates some of my main ideas on algocracy.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
And don't be deceived by the title of the paper either. It's one thing I would point out. Even though it's called The Threat of Algocracy, I think I do actually reach a more nuanced position at the end of it. I don't say it's all a bad thing. I just say that there are trade-offs to be recognized that we need to think about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, in what shape do you feel most confident that I guess the automation of political and law systems might take in the future? What do you see as the most likely outcome for the next, let's give it a year, in the next 20 years?
I think there will be more and more reliance upon kind of automated or maybe decision support type systems. Let's say maybe not fully automated. I think there's going to be pushback against the idea of completely automated systems, but there'll be increasing use of decision support systems. And one of the things I'm doing at the moment, so I'm running this project called Algocracy and Transhumanism, which is about finding ways in which to design these systems that are kind of contribute to human flourishing and human well-being in the future. And there are various ideas that participants in some of the workshops I've organized have come up with, which are interesting, and I hope to publish them soon. But there's also interesting ideas around creating indexes of transparency for algorithms. The way Transparency International creates which government is the most transparent. You could also create something similar for algorithmic systems. There are indexes of transparency for those systems, and that would be a way then of saying, well, you should use these kinds of systems and not these ones. Mm-hmm. That would be a practical policy involvement here as well.
Excellent. Oh, well, that sounds like it's a very useful thing to do. So how do people get involved with that? Is there a particular website, or is it mentioned?
Yeah, there's algocracy.wordpress.com at the moment. I wasn't able to get the algocracy.com, but anyway, somebody's stolen that already. Mm. But I might buy up I think there's .org and .net. I haven't done so yet. But,
yeah, .org, do it quick. Do it before I release this video.
Yeah, somebody will do it. That's the problem.
Do it in the next 5 minutes.
That's the current website in a way. And that contains all the information in relation to the project, and the podcasts and the blog posts and information about forthcoming events will be up there as well soon. So I'll be doing a lot over the next kind of 10 months or so for the lifetime of the project.
Fantastic. Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show again, and thanks. It's actually quite a long interview, this one, and I do appreciate like the energy and well, you're just staying with it for such a long time. So yeah, much appreciated, John.
And, all right, it was great to talk to you again. Thanks.
Look forward to listening to more of your podcasts in the near future. And yeah, hopefully I'll interview James Hughes on Algocracy as well in the near future. He's coming to Australia to speak at a Norbert Weiner conference, and I believe he's going to be addressing Algocracy specifically. And I think that's where I found out about the idea.
Yeah, he mentioned it to me. Yeah, he mentioned it to me before.
Yeah, cool. So. Awesome. All right, thanks very much. And I'll just...
All right, good. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Yes, and thank you, viewers watching, and please subscribe.
Okay.
Cheers.